She walked into that room, and every conversation stopped. Not because she was beautiful, not because she was important, but because she didn't belong, and everyone knew it. A size 22 woman, in a green dress, standing in a doorway full of crystal and candlelight, and people who looked like they'd been built in a factory. They looked at her arms, they looked at her hips, they looked at each other. A woman at the end of the table pressed her lips together so hard her jaw shook, trying not to laugh. Nobody said a word. They didn't have to. The silence said everything. She was the joke, sent there by someone who wanted to see what happens when a woman like her steps into a world like this. And she could feel it. Every stare, every whisper held behind teeth. Every pair of eyes measuring her body and finding it wrong. She wanted to turn around. She wanted to disappear. But then, the man at the head of the table stood up, and what he did next, nobody in that room was prepared. For this is Margot's story. They sent her, as a joke, because of her weight. The Mafia boss's response. Silence the room. The girl in the lavender dress stood at the edge of the sidewalk, with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She was 9 years old in her memory, standing outside the birthday party she had been invited to only because her mother had asked the other mother directly. Inside, through the bay window, she could see the other girls laughing at something. One of them held up a balloon animal shaped like a pig and pointed toward the front door. The birthday girl covered her mouth and doubled over with laughter. Margot Bellamy had turned around and walked 3 blocks home without ringing the doorbell. She never told her mother what happened. She simply said the party was fun. Now, 23 years later, Margot stood outside, a different building entirely, a limestone townhouse on the Upper East Side, with black iron railings and a door so polished it reflected the street, and her knuckles were white again. She could feel the lavender dress memory pressing against her ribs like a fist. She told herself this was different. She told herself she was a grown woman with a job to do. But the feeling was identical. The certainty that she was about to walk into a room that did not want her. She had no idea how right she was. 3 days earlier, Margot had been elbow-deep in bread dough at Rossetti's Bakery on Arthur Avenue when her phone buzzed. Her cousin Nadia's name glowed on the cracked screen. Margot almost didn't answer. Conversations with Nadia always left her feeling smaller, though she could never quite explain why. Nadia had a way of wrapping cruelty in helpfulness, the way a wasp builds its nest inside something beautiful. "I have a job for you," Nadia said without greeting. "One night, private dinner. You'd be serving, helping the hostess, that sort of thing. They need someone last minute and the pay is $1,500. Margot wiped flour on her apron and pressed the phone harder against her ear. $1,500 was more than she made in 2 weeks at the bakery. Her mother's physical therapy bills had been stacking up like bricks against the front door, each one heavier than the last. Her younger brother Calvin needed new braces. The transmission on the Honda was slipping again. "Why me?" she asked, because she had learned to ask that question even when she didn't want to hear the answer. "Because you're reliable," Nadia said smoothly. "And you're available. It's this Saturday, a private residence in Manhattan, very upscale. You'd need something nice to wear." Margot looked down at herself, size 22, flour dusted, hands rough from years of kneading and washing and lifting sheet pans in a hot kitchen. She owned exactly one dress that could be called nice, a dark green wrap dress her mother had given her for Christmas, the fabric soft as a whispered apology. "I can do it," she said. "Perfect." There was something in Nadia's voice that Margot couldn't name, a brightness that felt like the edge of a blade catching light. "I'll send you the details." What Margot didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the phone call had happened on speaker. Nadia was sitting in the back office of Lux Staffing, the boutique agency she managed, surrounded by 3 of her co-workers. When Margot said yes, Nadia pressed mute and the office erupted. "You didn't," said Jolene, the receptionist, her hand over her mouth. I absolutely did. Nadia set the phone down and crossed her legs with the satisfaction of someone who had just solved a complicated equation. They asked for our most stunning girl for the Kavanaugh dinner. We're completely booked, so I'm sending Margot. The Kavanaugh dinner, repeated Priya, the booking coordinator, her eyes widening, as in Silas Kavanaugh, as in the man whose last companion was a literal runway model. That's the one, Nadia. They're going to lose it. They'll never hire us again. They won't trace it back to us. I told her it was a serving gig. She shows up, realizes it's a companion placement, doesn't know what to do, the whole thing falls apart. Meanwhile, I call the Kavanaugh people Monday, apologize profusely for the mix-up, and offer them a replacement at no charge. They'll love us more for fixing it. And Margot? Jolene asked. Nadia shrugged one elegant shoulder. She gets paid. She gets a free dinner. She'll be fine. It's not like anything was going to happen anyway. You've seen her. The laughter that followed was thin and sharp, the kind that draws blood without leaving a visible mark. Margot spent Saturday afternoon getting ready in her mother's bathroom because the mirror was bigger. Iris Bellamy sat in her wheelchair in the hallway, watching her daughter through the open door with the quiet intensity of a woman who had spent her whole life studying the weather of her children's faces. "You look beautiful, baby," Iris said. Margot smoothed the green dress over her hips and tried to see what her mother saw. The mirror showed her a 32-year-old woman with dark auburn hair. She'd curled carefully, brown eyes she'd lined with a steady hand. Full lips she'd colored a deep berry. Her skin was clear. Her posture was good. But the mirror also showed everything else. The width of her arms, the roundness of her belly, the way the dress strained slightly at the zipper. She catalogued these things the way a prisoner catalogues the walls of their cell, with exhaustive, defeated familiarity. "It's just a serving job," Margot said. "Even so," Iris wheeled closer. "Stand up straight. You carry yourself like you're apologizing for taking up space. Stop that." Margot met her mother's eyes in the mirror. Iris Bellamy had been beautiful once, before the accident, before the wheelchair, before 2 decades of fighting insurance companies and swallowing pride. She was still beautiful, Margot thought, in the way that broken things can be more beautiful than whole ones because they've survived their own destruction. "I'll be home by midnight," Margot said. "You come home whenever you come home, and you hold your head up." The car service Nadia arranged dropped Margot off at 7:15. The townhouse was taller than she expected, narrow and imperious, the kind of building that looked down at the street, the way certain people look down at everyone. A man in a dark suit opened the door before she could knock. He was enormous, well over 6 feet, with the build of someone who had been hired specifically to be a barrier between the world and whatever existed on the other side of that door. "Name," he said. "Margot Bellamy. I'm with Lux Staffing." He checked a tablet, and something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, more like the flicker of a card player who'd been dealt an unexpected hand. He recovered quickly, his face returning to professional neutrality, and stepped aside. Through the foyer, second door on the left. The foyer was floored in black and white marble. A chandelier hung overhead like frozen rain. The walls held paintings that Margot suspected cost more than her mother's house. She could smell something extraordinary. Roasted lamb, maybe, with garlic and rosemary, and underneath it, the woody scent of expensive cologne that had been left hanging in the air by someone who'd recently passed through. She found the second door on the left and opened it. The dining room was long and candlelit. A table set for 12 stretched down its center, gleaming with crystal and silver. 8 people were already seated, 4 men in suits that fit like second skins, and 4 women so polished they seemed to have been manufactured rather than born. Every surface in the room reflected light. The wine glasses, the silverware, the women's etchings, the men's watches, and when Margot walked in, every reflective surface seemed to turn toward her at once, capturing her from a dozen angles and holding her there. The silence was instantaneous. Not the natural quiet of people pausing their conversations, but the specific, weighted silence that descends when something has gone wrong, in a way that's also entertaining. A woman at the near end of the table, platinum hair, collarbone sharp enough to cut glass, looked Margot up and down with the slow deliberation of someone reading a menu they've already decided to send back. The man beside her leaned in and whispered something. The woman pressed her lips together and looked away, the corners of her mouth trembling with the effort of not laughing. Margot felt the room's assessment travel across her body like hands she hadn't consented to. The width of her hips, the softness of her arms, the way her dress, which had looked beautiful in her mother's bathroom, now seemed like a costume, the wrong costume, in a room full of women who wore their clothes the way buildings wear glass, as architecture rather than covering. Her throat went tight. She looked for the kitchen entrance, for any sign that this was a catering job, for someone holding a tray or wearing an apron. There was none. A man at the far end of the table stood up. He was tall and lean, early 40s, with black hair graying at the temples in a way that looked deliberate, like a choice rather than a concession. His suit was charcoal and cut with the precision of something that had been built on his body rather than for it. His face was angular, composed, with dark eyes that moved with the unhurried attention of someone accustomed to seeing everything and reacting to very little. Silas Kavanaugh crossed the room. Every person at that table watched him the way animals watch the apex predator of their ecosystem, with a mixture of deference and fear, so internalized it had become reflex. He moved through their attention without acknowledging it, the way a river moves through rock without apology. He stopped in front of Margot. She was prepared for anything. Dismissal, confusion, anger. She had spent her entire life preparing for the various forms that rejection takes. She had a catalog. "You must be my dinner companion," he said. His voice was lower than she expected, quieter. There was no question in it. I think there's been a mistake," Margot said. "I was told this was a serving position." Something flickered behind his eyes, not surprise, recognition, as if he had seen the shape of what had happened the moment she walked in and had already assembled the full picture before she spoke. "There's no mistake," he said. "You're here, that's sufficient." He extended his hand. Not to shake, to guide. Palm up, fingers relaxed, the gesture of a man who opens doors, rather than pushes through them. The room had gone so quiet that Margot could hear a candle flame hissing somewhere to her left. She could feel the stares on her, skin like heat. The platinum-haired woman was no longer suppressing her amusement. She was openly studying this exchange with the fascination of someone watching a nature documentary in which the predator behaves against its own species programming. Margot looked at Silas Kavanaugh's hand. Clean nails, a faded scar across the knuckles, no rings. She looked up at his face. His expression held nothing she could name as pity. Pity she would have recognized instantly. She was fluent in that language. This was something else, something that felt, impossibly, like interest. She placed her hand in his. He led her to the empty chair beside his own at the head of the table. He pulled it out for her. She sat down. The fabric of the chair was velvet, cool against her bare arms. A water glass appeared in front of her, then a wine glass. Silas sat beside her, adjusted his napkin, and turned to the man on his left. "Fletcher, you were telling me about the port situation in Newark." And, just like that, conversation resumed. But it was different now. The air in the room had been rearranged. Every person at that table had watched Silas Kavanaugh, a man who had made his empire on the principle that nothing entered his world without his explicit selection, except this woman, as if she had been his choice all along. And because Silas's choices were not questioned, only observed and obeyed, the room absorbed this information and adjusted accordingly. But they didn't understand it, and Margot could feel their confusion like static. Dinner was served in courses. Lamb, as she had guessed, with roasted figs and a red wine reduction, a bitter green salad with shaved pecorino, bread that was almost as good as what she baked at Rossetti's. Almost. Margot ate carefully, the way she always ate in public. Slowly, in small portions, aware of every bite as a potential performance for others to evaluate. She'd learned early that a fat woman eating is a spectacle people feel entitled to watch. She had learned to make herself as small as possible at the table, which was a particular cruelty because the table was one of the few places she felt genuinely alive. She loved food. She understood food. She spoke its language the way some people speak music, intuitively, from the body outward. "You're not eating," Silas observed without looking at her. He was cutting his lamb with the focus of a surgeon. "I am." "You're performing eating. There's a difference." She set her fork down. "That's a strange thing to notice." "I notice most things. It's a professional requirement." He took a sip of wine. "You don't like the lamb?" "The lamb is excellent. The reduction is slightly over-reduced. It's leaning bitter instead of sweet. But the meat itself is perfect. The rosemary was added whole rather than chopped, which means whoever cooked this understands that rosemary releases different compounds at different temperatures." She stopped. She had not meant to say all of that. It had come out the way truth does when it's been held too long, in a rush, undressed, embarrassing. But Silas Kavanaugh had turned his full attention to her for the first time, and his expression was not amusement or condescension. It was the look of a man who had just found something he wasn't expecting to find. "You cook," he said. "I bake. I work at a bakery in the Bronx." "Then you understand bread." "Yes." "The bread tonight?" Margot hesitated. "It's good. Mass-produced good. The crumb is even, which means it was proofed in a controlled environment. But it doesn't have character. Real bread has imperfections, uneven air pockets, a crust that fights back. This bread is polite. I don't trust polite bread." The corner of Silas's mouth moved, not a smile. Something preceding a smile, like the first crack of dawn before sunrise. "I don't trust polite anything." Across the table, the platinum-haired woman, whose name was Corinne and whose husband was Silas's attorney, was watching this exchange the way one watches a locked door begin to open on its own. She leaned toward her husband. He shook his head once, sharply. She leaned back. The rest of dinner passed in fragments Margot would later try to assemble into a coherent sequence. Silas asked her about the bakery. She told him about Rossetti's, about the owner, old Giuseppe, who still hand-shaped every ciabatta loaf at 4 in the morning, about the regulars who came in not for the bread, but for the feeling of being remembered, because Giuseppe greeted every person by name and asked after their families with the sincerity of a man who believed that bread and memory were made from the same ingredients. She told him about her mother's accident, a truck running a red light 7 years ago, everything different after, without self-pity, because self-pity was a luxury she had never been able to afford. She told him about Calvin, who was 17 and brilliant and angry in the way that brilliant 17-year-olds are when they can see exactly how unfair the world is but can't yet change it. Silas listened. Not the way powerful men usually listen, with one ear while the other calculates what they want to say next, but with the full weight of his attention. He asked questions that were precise and unexpected. Not "what do you do" questions, but "why do you do it" questions. He wanted to know why she chose baking over cooking, why sourdough was harder to master than brioche, why bread of all things. "Because bread is honest," Margot said. "You can't fake bread. If the dough isn't right, if the timing is off, if you didn't give it enough attention, the bread tells on you. Every loaf is a record of how much care went into it. You can't buy your way out of bad bread." He was quiet for a moment. "Most people in my life have tried to buy their way out of something." "What about you?" The question surprised them both. She saw it register on his face, a barely perceptible shift, the kind that, on a less controlled man, would have been a flinch. No one asked Silas Kavanaugh direct questions. No one treated him as someone who might need to answer rather than command. "I've tried to buy my way out of several things," he said. "I've succeeded at most of them. The ones I failed at taught me more." "Like what?" He looked at her then, with an expression she would think about for days afterward. It was the look of a man standing at the edge of something, a confession, a cliff, a door he usually kept locked, and deciding whether to step forward. "Loneliness," he said. "You can't buy your way out of loneliness. Believe me, I've tried." The dessert course came and went. Coffee was served. The other guests began to leave in pairs, each one passing Silas to pay their respects. A handshake, a murmured word, the kind of deference that sits halfway between affection and fear. Several of them looked at Margot as they passed. Some with naked curiosity, some with something harder. Corinne paused behind Margot's chair and placed one manicured hand on the back of it, as if she wanted to touch Margot herself, but couldn't bring herself to bridge the distance. "Interesting evening," Corinne said to no one in particular, and left. When the room was empty except for the two of them and the dying candles, Silas leaned back in his chair and studied Margot with the attention he had been rationing all evening. "You know you weren't sent here to serve dinner," he said. "I figured that out about 10 seconds after I walked in. And you stayed. I didn't know how to leave." "You knew exactly how to leave. You chose not to. Those are different things." Margot felt the truth of this settle over her like a blanket. Uncomfortable because it was warm, and she had grown accustomed to the cold. She had stayed because something in his handshake, in his voice, in the way he said, "That's sufficient," as if her presence were a gift rather than a problem, had made her feel that leaving would mean losing something she hadn't known she was looking for. "Someone sent you here as a joke," Silas said, and his voice had changed. The warmth was gone. What replaced it was the voice she imagined he used in rooms where decisions were made that didn't appear in any legal record. Flat, precise, carrying the particular authority of a man whose displeasure has material consequences. Someone at that staffing agency decided it would be entertaining to put you in a room full of people who would judge you. Is it they thought I would humiliate you? They were counting on it. Margot's chest tightened. She had known on some level from the moment she walked in. But hearing it said aloud, confirmed, dissected, laid bare, was different from suspecting it. Suspicion is a wound you can ignore. Confirmation is surgery without anesthesia. "Nadia," she whispered. "Your cousin. She manages the agency." Silas was quiet for a long moment. The candlelight moved across his face, turning his features into something almost sculptural. The sharp jaw, the dark hollows beneath his cheekbones, the scar on his hand that she now noticed extended further than she'd first seen, disappearing beneath his cuff. "I grew up in Bensonhurst," he said. "My mother cleaned offices. My father drove a truck until his back gave out, and then he drove nothing. We lived above a dry cleaner. The building smelled like chemicals and other people's clothes. I was short for my age, didn't hit my growth until 16. Every day walking to school was an exercise in survival. You learn things when you're the smallest person in a dangerous room. You learn to see what other people miss. You learn to identify who is pretending and who is real." He paused. "You're real. You don't know me. I know that you walked into a room that was designed to break you, and you sat down and talked about bread. That tells me that's everything I need to know about who you are." The car that took Margot home was black and silent and smelled like leather. She sat in the back seat and cried. Not the loud, theatrical crying of someone performing grief, but the quiet, chest-shaking crying of someone whose armor has been removed so gently they didn't realize it was gone until they felt the air on their skin. She did not expect to hear from Silas Kavanaugh again. Men like that did not call women like her. This was not pessimism. It was pattern recognition. 32 years of data, rigorously collected. He called the next morning. "I'd like to see you," he said without preamble. "Dinner, somewhere you choose." "Why?" "Because I spent the entire night thinking about polite bread, and I've decided I need to try the impolite kind." She laughed before she could stop herself. It was the first time in longer than she could remember that someone had made her laugh without her having to earn it first. She chose a small Dominican restaurant in Washington Heights that her mother loved. Low ceilings, loud music, tables so close together that your conversation became everyone's conversation. It was a test, though she wouldn't have called it that. She wanted to see how Silas Kavanaugh handled a room where his name meant nothing, where his suit was overdressed, where the food came on mismatched plates and the wine was whatever was open. He handled it the way water handles a new container, by filling it completely and without resistance. He took off his jacket and rolled his sleeves. He spoke Spanish to the owner, imperfect but earnest, with an accent that suggested he'd learned it from necessity rather than study. He ate the mofongo with his hands when the owner told him to, and he listened to the old man's story about leaving Santo Domingo in 1978 with $17 and a photograph of his mother, and Silas's eyes changed in a way that told Margot this story meant something to him that went beyond politeness. "You fit here," Margot said, surprised. "I fit in more places than people expect. That's deliberate." "Why?" "Because the moment people put you in a single category, they stop paying attention, and I never want anyone to stop paying attention to me. It's bad for business and worse for survival." Their second date happened 4 days later at a gallery opening in Chelsea that Silas had been obligated to attend. He called her the morning of and said, "I have to go to a thing tonight. It will be full of people who buy art they don't understand to impress people they don't like. I'd rather not suffer alone." She almost said no. The instinct was automatic, the reflex of a woman who had learned that every public appearance was a potential ambush. But her mother's voice was in her head, sharp as a struck bell. "Stand up straight. Stop apologizing for taking up space." "What should I wear?" she asked. "Whatever you want. The people at these events dress for each other. I'd prefer you dress for yourself." She wore a black blouse with wide sleeves and dark slacks, and the one pair of heels she owned that didn't make her feet ache. When Silas saw her outside the gallery, he looked at her for a long moment, not the up-and-down assessment she was bracing for, but something slower, more focused, as if he were reading a page he didn't want to rush through. "You look good," he said. Simple, direct, no qualifiers. Inside the gallery, the art was enormous and abstract and priced in the mid-six figures. Margot moved through the rooms with the careful attention of someone who didn't know much about art, but knew a great deal about craft, about the hours that went into making something, the intention behind each choice. She stopped in front of a canvas that was mostly white, with a single, jagged line of red running diagonally across it. "What do you think?" Silas asked, standing beside her. "I think someone put a lot of effort into making this look effortless. And I think that line isn't random. It's too precise. Whoever made this knew exactly what they were doing and wanted us to think they didn't." A woman nearby, the gallery owner, it turned out, overheard and turned sharply. "That's actually exactly what the artist has said about this piece. Are you a collector?" "I'm a baker," Margot said. The woman blinked, recalibrated, and then smiled with genuine warmth. "Well, you have a better eye than half the collectors in this room." Later in the car, Silas said, "You see things clearly. Most people see what they've been told to see. You see what's actually there. That's what you said about yourself. Maybe that's why this works." Over the following weeks, he made space for her in his life, with the careful precision of a man rearranging a room to accommodate something valuable. He didn't ask her to change. He didn't suggest she dress differently or lose weight or inhabit herself in any way other than the way she already did. When they walked together, he matched her pace. When they sat together, he chose seats that didn't make her feel observed. She noticed these things, the small architectures of consideration that most people would have missed, and each one was a stone laid in a foundation she was terrified to trust. He took her to his mother's apartment in Bensonhurst on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after the dinner. Teresa Kavanaugh was 71, small and fierce, with Silas's dark eyes and a voice that could strip paint. She lived in the same apartment above the dry cleaner, though the building now belonged to Silas, and the dry cleaner had been replaced by a bookshop. "So you're the bread girl," Teresa said, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed. Margot looked at Silas, who was standing behind her with an expression she had never seen on him before, something young and almost vulnerable, as if this small, fierce woman could undo him in ways that boardrooms and backrooms never could. "I'm Margot," she said. "He talks about you like you invented flour. Come in. I made coffee. It's terrible. The machine is broken and he keeps buying me new ones I can't figure out." The apartment smelled like coffee and lavender and decades. Every surface held photographs. Silas as a child, thin and serious. A man Margot recognized as his father from the same jawline. Teresa young and startlingly beautiful, standing outside a church in a white dress. Teresa sat Margot at the kitchen table and put a cup of genuinely terrible coffee in front of her and proceeded to interrogate her with the thoroughness of a federal prosecutor. "You work in a bakery?" "Yes." "You take care of your mother?" "Yes." "She's in a wheelchair?" "Yes." "And your brother?" "Calvin. He's 17. "And you went to that dinner thinking it was a job?" Margot looked at her hands. "Yes." "And they sent you there to be laughed at?" "Yes." Teresa reached across the table and took Margot's hand. Her grip was astonishing. The grip of a woman who had wrung out mops and scrubbed floors and held a family together through decades of difficulty with nothing but her own 2 hands. "My son has had many women sit at this table," Teresa said. "Beautiful women, expensive women, women who smiled at me like I was a photograph they needed to pose with. None of them took a sip of this coffee without making a face." She looked at Margot's cup. Margot had drunk half of it. "You're either very kind or you have no taste buds." "The coffee is terrible," Margot said. "But you made it for me. That matters more." Teresa Kavanaugh looked at her son over Margot's shoulder. Whatever passed between them was silent and complete. Silas nodded once. "Stay for dinner," Teresa said. It wasn't a question. That night, driving back to the Bronx, Silas was quiet for a long time. The city moved past the windows, bridges and lights, and the particular darkness of water at night. "My mother has never asked anyone to stay for dinner," he said. "In 30 years of me bringing people to that apartment, she has never once asked anyone to stay." Margot felt something break open inside her, not painfully, the way things had broken before, but the way a seed breaks open. From the inside, because something inside it has grown too large to be contained. "I liked her," Margot said. "She terrifies most people. I grew up with Iris Bellamy. I'm immune to terrifying women." He laughed. It was a real laugh, unguarded, and it transformed his face into something she wanted to memorize. The way the angles softened, the way his eyes creased, the way he looked for just a moment, like the boy from Bensonhurst who had walked to school every day through a world that wanted to eat him alive and had somehow emerged whole. But the fear didn't go away. It lived inside Margot like a second skeleton. The framework of every rejection, every sideways glance, every bathroom mirror, every dress that didn't fit, every table she sat down at, wondering if the chair would hold. Every man who had looked through her, as if she were made of glass. The fear said, "This isn't real." The fear said, "He'll wake up." The fear said, "You're a novelty, a project, a story he tells himself about being different from the men everyone thinks he is." She was folding laundry in her mother's living room when the fear finally spoke out loud. "He's going to leave," she said, not to Iris, not to anyone, just to the room. Iris looked up from her crossword. "Who?" "Silas, eventually, when he realizes." "Realizes what?" Margot sat on the edge of the couch with a towel pressed against her chest like a shield. That I'm not what someone like him should be with. That people are looking at us. That his associates are wondering what he's doing. That there are women who match him, who fit." Iris set down her pen. come here. Margot didn't move. Margot Renee Bellamy, come here. She went. She knelt beside the wheelchair, the way she'd done as a girl when she needed her mother's hands in her hair. Iris cupped her daughter's face. You listen to me. You have spent your entire life making yourself smaller, for people who weren't worth your full size. You eat small, you dream small, you take up as little room as possible because someone, somewhere, told you that you didn't deserve the space you occupy. And that is a lie. It is the biggest lie anyone has ever told you, and you have believed it so long it feels like the truth. But it isn't. Mama, I'm not finished. That man didn't look at you and see a woman who needed fixing. He looked at you and saw what I've always seen, someone extraordinary who's been hiding. If he leaves, he leaves. You'll survive it the way you've survived everything, but don't you dare push him away, because you've decided, you know the ending before it's been written. Margot pressed her face against her mother's palm and breathed. The towel fell to the floor. Outside, a car alarm went off and stopped. The refrigerator hummed. These were the sounds of her life, small, domestic, unremarkable, and she held them like anchors. The confrontation with Nadia happened without Margot planning it. They ran into each other at a family christening in Queens. Margot in a navy dress, Nadia in white, the symbolism so obvious it would have been funny if it weren't nauseating. Nadia approached her with the confident stride of someone who has never been held accountable for anything. I heard you've been seeing Kavanaugh, Nadia said, her voice carrying across the patio. That's wild. I never would have guessed. No, Margot said. You wouldn't have, because you sent me there expecting him to send me away. Nadia's smile didn't waver, but her eyes changed. I don't know what you're talking about. You told me it was a serving job. You put me in that room, knowing exactly what it was. You did it because you thought it would be funny. Because you thought a man like that would look at a woman like me, and... She stopped. The words were jagged in her throat, and she refused to bleed in front of Nadia. You know exactly what you did. Margot, you're being dramatic. No. I'm being honest. For the first time in our entire lives, I'm being honest with you. And here's what's true, Nadia. You have spent years making me feel like I should be grateful for any attention at all. Like I should be thankful for crumbs. Like being invited to the party was enough, even when the party was a joke at my expense. She could feel the christening guests watching. She didn't care. I'm done being grateful, and I'm done being the person you feel better standing next to. She walked away. Her hands were shaking, her heart was hammering, but her back was straight, and her head was up, and somewhere behind her she could hear the silence she'd left in her wake. The same silence that had filled the dining room on the Upper East Side, except this time she was the one who had created it. Silas found out about the confrontation before Margot told him, when he had a way of knowing things, not through surveillance or control, but through the network of loyalty and information that surrounded him like an atmosphere. When she came to his apartment that evening, he was sitting in the kitchen with his sleeves rolled up, slicing tomatoes with the focus he brought to everything. I heard you made a speech at a christening, he said. It wasn't a speech, it was a reckoning. Those are usually the same thing. He set down the knife. Are you all right? I think so. I think I've been not all right for a very long time, and today might be the first day I'm starting to be all right. He nodded. He didn't offer to fix it, or avenge it, or make calls. He simply wiped his hands, walked to where she stood, and put his arms around her. She stiffened, an involuntary response, the body's memory of all the times it had been touched carelessly or not at all. And then she softened against him. He was warm. He smelled like tomatoes and soap and the particular clean scent of someone who carries power the way other people carry briefcases, as a daily, functional object rather than an ornament. I need to tell you something, she said into his chest. Tell me. I keep waiting for this to end. Every morning I wake up and check my phone and expect the message where you explain that you've reconsidered, that you've come to your senses, that someone has shown you my picture and reminded you what I look like, as if you've forgotten, as if this has all been some kind of hallucination. He pulled back far enough to look at her face. His hands remained on her waist, firmly, deliberately, in the way of a man who does not touch casually or accidentally. Margot, I have built everything I have on one skill, seeing what is actually there, not what people want me to see. Every person in my life, every associate, every competitor, every so-called friend, performs for me. They show me what they think I want. They are careful and calculated and rehearsed. You walked into a room designed to humiliate you, and you talked to me about bread, real bread, honest bread. His jaw tightened. Do you understand how rare that is? In my world, in any world. I'm not rare, I'm just... Do not finish that sentence. Do not stand in my kitchen and diminish yourself. You have done that for everyone else your entire life. You do not do it here. The force of it, not anger, but something fiercer, the intensity of a man defending the thing he has decided to protect, silenced her. Not the way the room had silenced when he chose her at the dinner. A different silence. The silence of someone hearing, for the first time, a truth they have needed their whole life to hear. He kissed her. It was careful, almost deliberate, the way he did everything. Not tentative, not hesitant, but intentional. A choice made with full awareness of its weight. When he pulled back, his thumb traced her jawline, and she realized she was crying again. "Stop waiting for me to leave," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." The months that followed were not a fairy tale. Margot did not transform. She did not lose weight. She did not wake up one morning and see a different woman in the mirror. What changed was subtler and more significant. She began to see the woman in the mirror as someone worth looking at. Not because of what Silas saw in her, but because his vision had given her permission to see herself through something other than the lens of shame. She continued working at Rossetti's. Silas never asked her to stop. He came to the bakery on Saturday mornings and sat at the counter and drank espresso and watched her work with the attention of someone studying something they admire. Giuseppe called him Figlio and gave him day-old bread that Silas claimed was better than anything his private chef had ever made. "It has character," Silas said, holding up a misshapen ciabatta with the reverence most men reserve for expensive objects. "It has air pockets," Margot said. Same thing. There was a particular evening in late September that Margot would later identify as the night something fundamental shifted between them. Silas had invited her to his apartment, the real one, not the townhouse where the dinner had been held, which was a property he used exclusively for business. His actual home was a floor-through loft in Tribeca, spare and clean, with tall windows that looked out over the river. The furniture was minimal. The bookshelves were full. It was the home of a man who valued silence and space and who had earned the right to both. He cooked for her. This surprised her, not the cooking itself, but the competence of it. He made cacio e pepe, the simplest of pasta dishes, which is io suri, also the hardest because it requires timing and confidence and the willingness to trust that 3 ingredients are enough when they're treated with respect. "My mother taught me," he said, twisting the pasta onto plates with practiced hands. "She said a man who can't feed himself is a man who depends on others for survival, and that's a man who can be controlled." Smart woman. Terrifying woman. There's overlap. They ate at his kitchen counter, sitting on stools, their knees almost touching. The pasta was perfect. Margot told him so, and then she told him why. The starch water emulsified correctly. The pepper was freshly cracked and toasted. The cheese melted rather than clumped. He listened to her technical breakdown the way some men listen to music, with evident pleasure. After dinner, they moved to the couch. The city glowed through the windows. Silas poured 2 glasses of something amber and strong and sat with the careful distance of a man who understood that proximity is a negotiation, not an assumption. "Can I ask you something?" Margot said. "You can ask me anything. Whether I answer is a different matter. Why aren't you married? You're 42. You're..." She gestured vaguely at his entire existence. "You could have anyone." He was quiet for a moment, swirling his drink. "I was engaged once. 8 years ago. Her name was Celeste. She was everything a woman in my position is supposed to be. Beautiful, composed, fluent in 3 languages, extraordinarily talented at performing warmth without actually feeling it. What happened? I came home early one afternoon and found her rehearsing, not with anyone, alone. She was standing in the bathroom, practicing her smile in the mirror. Different versions of it. The warm one. The sympathetic one. The one from my mother. She had a system. She'd labeled them in her head. He took a sip. I realized I was living with someone who treated our relationship like a performance. Everything was designed. Everything was curated. There was no version of her that existed when no one was watching, because she was always watching herself. That's heartbreaking. It was clarifying. I ended it that week. Since then, I've had... He paused, choosing his words. Arrangements, companionship, women who understood the terms and were comfortable with them, but nothing that required me to be present in the way a real relationship requires. And now, he looked at her. The city light caught his face, and she could see the boy from Bensonhurst in the man from Tribeca. The same watchfulness, the same hunger for something authentic in a world of performance. Now I'm sitting on a couch with a woman who told me my pasta was good, and then spent 3 minutes explaining the science of starch emulsion, and I've never been more interested in another person in my entire life. But Silas's world was not gentle. The people who orbited him were sharp-edged and suspicious, and several of them made their skepticism about Margot known through the silent, devastating language of exclusion. The unreturned greetings, the conversations that stopped when she approached, the seating arrangements at events that placed her at the furthest possible distance from the center of power. Silas addressed this once, at a private gathering at his attorney's home. Corinne, who had never spoken a direct word to Margot, made a comment to another woman about charity cases, loud enough to be heard across the room. Silas set down his drink with a sound that was barely audible, but somehow silenced every conversation within a 30-foot radius. Corinne, he said, and the single word carried the weight of a closing door. Margot is here because I want her here. If that arrangement is uncomfortable for you, I'd suggest you examine why. And then I'd suggest you keep whatever you find to yourself. He picked up his drink. Conversation resumed. Corinne did not speak to Margot for the rest of the evening, but she also never made another comment. In Silas's world, being addressed directly by him on a matter of conduct was equivalent to a final warning, and everyone in that room understood the taxonomy. Margot's mother met Silas on a Sunday in October, when the leaves in the Bronx were turning the color of fire. He arrived with flowers, not the extravagant bouquets his assistant usually procured for occasions, but a simple bundle of sunflowers he'd bought from a street vendor, because Margot had mentioned once, in passing, that her mother's favorite flower was the sunflower, and that they always made Iris think of the house she'd grown up in upstate. Iris Bellamy looked at the flowers, then at Silas, then at her daughter, and her eyes filled with tears. Not because of the flowers themselves, but because of what they represented. The evidence that someone had listened to her daughter carefully enough to remember a detail that small. "Sit down," Iris said, and her voice was steady despite the tears. "Margot, make coffee. The good coffee, not the instant." Calvin was in the living room, folded into the armchair with his headphones around his neck, watching the doorway with the guarded intensity of a 17-year-old who had been the man of the house since he was 10. He was tall and thin and had Iris's sharp eyes and Margot's stubbornness, and he had not said a word since Silas arrived. Silas noticed. He sat at the kitchen table, accepted his coffee, answered Iris's questions, and then turned toward the living room. "Calvin," he said, "your sister tells me you're interested in engineering." Calvin pulled one headphone off. "Aerospace engineering. Where are you applying?" "MIT, Georgia Tech, maybe Cornell, if we can afford it." The last sentence came out barbed, aimed not at Silas but at the universe in general, at the particular cruelty of a system that makes brilliant 17-year-olds calculate their dreams in dollars. "If you get into MIT," Silas said, "you go to MIT, The money is a problem I can help solve. Calvin sat up straighter, his jaw tightened. I don't need charity. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering an investment. There's a difference. Charity asks for gratitude. An investment asks for returns. You go to MIT, you become an aerospace engineer, and someday you build something that matters. That's my return. Calvin stared at him for a long moment. Whatever he saw in Silas's face, steadiness maybe, or the particular credibility of a man who had clawed his way out of Bensonhurst and therefore understood, bone deep, what it meant to want something you couldn't afford. It was enough. He nodded once and put his headphones back on. Oh, later, after Silas had left, Calvin found Margot in the kitchen. He's not what I expected, Calvin said. What did you expect? Some rich guy trying to buy his way into our family. And what did you get? Calvin was quiet for a moment. Someone who actually listens. That's weird. Rich people don't usually listen. He's not usual. Yeah, I noticed. Silas sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Margot had eaten every meal of her childhood, where she had done homework and argued with Calvin and watched her mother fill out medical forms with hands that shook from exhaustion but never from defeat. And he looked around the small kitchen with the same attention he'd given the dining room on the Upper East Side. As if the surroundings didn't determine the quality of what was inside them. Margot tells me you drove a truck, Iris said. He did, for 23 years. My husband drove a truck, until a steering column disagreed with his spine. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be useful. Can you reach that shelf above the refrigerator? Margot's brother put the good plates up there 2 Thanksgivings ago, and neither of us has been able to reach them since. Silas stood, reached the shelf easily, and handed down a set of plates painted with blue flowers. Iris ran her thumb over one of them. My mother's plates, she said. She brought them from North Carolina in a cardboard box in 1961. Not a single one has broken in 65 years. She looked up at Silas. I believe in things that last, Mr. Kavanaugh. So do I, Mrs. Bellamy. Then we understand each other. The proposal didn't happen the way proposals happen in stories. There was no restaurant, no ring in a champagne glass, no dramatic gesture designed to be witnessed and admired. It happened in the kitchen of Rossetti's bakery at 5:30 in the morning, while Margot was shaping sourdough loaves, and Silas was sitting on a flour-dusted stool, drinking espresso that was far too strong. Marry me, he said. She didn't stop shaping the dough. Her hands continued their work, folding, turning, pressing with the heel of her palm, because bread requires consistency, and so does love, and she had learned that the things worth having, Grakaser, the things you build, with steady hands. You're proposing to me in a bakery at 5 in the morning. I am. I have flour in my hair. I know. Your mother will say it's not romantic enough. My mother will say I should have done it months ago. Margot looked at him. Dawn was beginning to press against the bakery windows, turning the room gold. His sleeves were rolled up. There was a dusting of flour on his forearm from where he'd leaned on the counter. His eyes were dark and steady and completely, unmistakably certain. Yes, she said. She went back to the bread. He went back to his espresso, and the morning continued, the way mornings do, carrying ordinary people through extraordinary moments without stopping to mark the occasion. They married in December in a small ceremony at Teresa Kavanaugh's apartment above the bookshop in Bensonhurst. 40 people, no photographers from society pages, no crystal chandeliers or imported flowers. Instead, candles on every surface, and the smell of Teresa's cooking filling every room, and the sound of Giuseppe Rossetti arguing with Calvin about whether New York pizza was superior to Neapolitan pizza, a debate that would continue, unresolved, for years. Margot wore a dress the color of champagne that she'd chosen herself, not to hide in, but to be seen in. Calvin walked her through the narrow hallway. Iris watched from her wheelchair with tears streaming down her face and an expression of such ferocious pride that several guests later said they'd never seen anything more beautiful. Teresa made coffee. It was still terrible, Everyone drank it anyway. On the evening of their wedding, after the guests had gone, and the apartment was quiet, except for the sound of the city breathing outside the windows, Margot stood in the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. She was still a size 22. Her hair was still curling out of its careful arrangement. Her mascara had smudged from crying during the vows. She looked objectively like a woman who had been through an emotional day and was showing every minute of it on her face. But she did not look away. She did not catalog her flaws. She did not perform the ritual inventory of everything that was wrong, everything that needed fixing, everything that took up too much space. She looked at herself the way she looked at a finished loaf of bread, with recognition, with respect, with the understanding that imperfection is not a failure, but a signature. The proof that something was made by hand, with care, by someone who showed up every day and did the work. Silas appeared in the doorway behind her. He was still in his wedding shirt, top button undone, sleeves rolled up. He looked at her reflection in the mirror. "What do you see?" he asked. She considered the question. She thought about the girl in the lavender dress who had walked away from the birthday party. She thought about the woman in the green wrap dress who had walked into a room designed to destroy her and had refused to be destroyed. She thought about bread, honest bread, imperfect bread, the kind that takes time and attention and heat and pressure and emerges from the oven, transformed not into something different from what it was, but into the fullest expression of what it was always going to become. "I see someone who's enough," she said. He kissed the side of her neck. "You've always been enough. The world just took its time catching up." Outside, the city moved and breathed and carried on. Somewhere in Washington Heights, the Dominican restaurant owner was closing up for the night, stacking chairs on tables and humming a song from a country he left 48 years ago. Somewhere in the Bronx, Iris Bellamy was looking at a photograph of her daughter's wedding on a phone screen Calvin was holding up for her, and she was smiling with the satisfaction of a woman who had planted a seed in hard ground and lived long enough to see it bloom. Somewhere on Arthur Avenue, Rossetti's bakery sat dark and quiet, the ovens cooling, the counters clean, the yeast dormant in its containers, waiting for morning, waiting for hands, waiting to become something that would nourish the people who needed it most. And in a bathroom in Bensonhurst, a woman who had spent her whole life being told she was too much, finally understood that she had always been exactly right. She turned off the bathroom light and walked into the bedroom where her husband was waiting, reading a book with his glasses on. An image so domestic, so ordinary, so profoundly different from the man the world saw that it made her chest ache with gratitude. "Come to bed," he said without looking up. Then he looked up. "Why are you smiling?" "Because I'm happy, and because I keep expecting the happiness to have a catch, and it doesn't. There's no catch." He set the book down. "There's no catch." She climbed into bed beside him. The sheets were cool. The city hummed. Outside, somewhere in the distance, a church bell struck midnight, the sound traveling across the rooftops of a borough that had sheltered them both, in different decades and different ways, and delivered them to this exact moment. The bread was proof. The love was proof. The life she was building, by hand, with care, full of imperfections and character, and the stubborn refusal to be anything other than real, was the proof. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.